Truman Capote, in his famous literary classic, Breakfast at Tiffany's, writes a line which caught my attention. He says, "Anyone who ever gave you confidence, you owe them a lot." The revered founder Chancellor of Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning personally ensures that every one of his students and staff members are groomed into developing self-confidence with a capital S. And therefore, we owe him every achievement and every bit of every achievement, big or small. Offering these efforts to the Master, greetings from Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning, an institution of which I am a humble part and which is a large part of me. For those of you who have not heard of the Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning, I can tell you about it in the words of the essayist Stephen Leacock. Leacock writes in his essay on the need for a quiet college. He begins the essay by saying, "If somebody would give me about 24 very old elm trees and about 50 acres of wooded ground and lawn, not too near anywhere and not too far from everywhere, I think I could set up a college that would put all the big universities of today in the shade. I am not saying that it would be better, but it would be different."
विद्यानाम नरस्वरूपमधिकम् प्रच्छन्नगुप्तं धनम् विद्या शुभकरी विद्या गुरु विद्या बंधुजने विदेश गमने विद्या परम लोचनम् विद्या राजस पूज्यते न हि धनम् विद्या विहीनम् विद्यानाम परस्वरूपमधिकम् प्रच्छन्नगुप्तं धनम् विद्या भोगकरी यशस्सुभकरी विद्या गुरु विद्या बन्धुजने विदेशगमने विद्या परं लोचनम् विद्या राजसि पूज्यते न हि धनं विद्या विहीनं वसुम् विद्या भोगकरी विद्या नाम
The Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning is a deemed to be university, 4 decades old, with 4 well-established, completely residential campuses, offering education completely free of cost, focusing all the while on educare for life rather than education for a living. Why did the Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning and its Department of English Language and Literature venture to organize a webinar of this kind? Not to really add one more to the many webinars that are happening on a daily basis. There are webinars dime a dozen, most of them talking about how to upskill yourselves with technology. Many of them talking to you about how to publish better. Many of them talking to you about the different literary theories in the academia and meant for research. But our effort was deliberately and consciously in a different direction. Hence, the topic and the theme of this seminar, this webinar, has been very, very carefully, lovingly, and consciously chosen for you listeners. Sir C.P. Snow, an English novelist and a physical chemist. This is a rare combination to have a scientist as a writer. Became very famous, in my opinion, not for the number of books he wrote, or for the different scientific achievements. He actually came to repute because, or maybe disrepute actually, because of a lecture, a read lecture that he delivered in the Senate Hall of Cambridge in 1959. This lecture has later been recorded as The Two Cultures. He argued in that lecture that there is a widening gulf between scientists and literary intellectuals. There is this educational system that attempts to compartmentalize and divide the sciences and the humanities. And this, according to him, is the hindrance, the biggest hindrance to solving the problems of the world. In today's world, how is this thought relevant? We have scientists working in air-conditioned and sterilized laboratories day and night with antigens and vaccines to find a remedy, if not a cure. We have advertisements all over talking about boosting our physical immunity. In such a scenario, does literature have a place at all? Precisely what this webinar intends to convey. As much as we boost our physical immunities, we also need to boost our mental and spiritual immunities to go through this period of pandemic and panic. Science will provide us solutions for a better physical world, but it is literature that will provide us with solutions for a better mental, emotional, and spiritual world. Bringing the two together is what will give the world a holistic solution. The current scenario, and if I want to describe it, I'm reminded of John Steinbeck's a line from his famous novel of Mice and Men. He says, I quote, "Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other." And how true. Family, friends, relatives, neighbors, whom we described with wonderful adjectives as friendly, lovely, neighborly, etc., are these days described with a completely new set of adjectives. We call them a potential carrier, an asymptomatic person, a primary contact, and so on. In the pandemic lingo, positive is a depressing outcome and negative is a happy result. We've always advised our youngsters to be positive, but today we advise them to be positively negative. These are the ways in which language itself has been affected by the pandemic. In the post-pandemic lingo, seminars have become webinars. In the good old days, when you talked about a primary contact, he or she is the one you would meet or call up for an emergency when you need help. But today, when you talk about primary contact, you're talking about someone whom you have primarily infected. What a world of difference in the world of language itself. Coming to talk of literature, does the pandemic affect the world of literature and arts? There is historical evidence for this. Boccaccio's Decameron. You find that 7 young women and 3 young men cooped up in an isolated villa in the suburbs of Florence, engaging themselves in storytelling during the Black Death or the bubonic plague, is the framework of Boccaccio's Decameron. Think of Albert Camus' The Plague. Camus has created an unnamed narrator to tell us how the city of Oran is because of the plague spreading through the city. Now the question is, the inevitable has come. What does one do with it? There are people amongst us who either merely witness it, who suffer it, or who are frightened by it. The lines from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein very clearly explains our predicament. She says, "Nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change." The sudden change has brought a U-turn in human lives. And who will survive this? The one who can withstand this will survive this. The one who can adapt to change will survive this. It is not the technical skills but mental strength that will primarily help us get through this crisis. It requires some grit, some vim and some verve, and a lot of resilience, spiritual resilience, to actually get through this crisis that has afflicted humanity. And all of this, the remedies that I just suggested, are to do with the mindscape of man, with a spiritual understanding, which may or may not have anything to do with his religion. Precisely where reading good literature, participating in intellectual discussions of this kind, becoming a participant in a webinar of this nature will contribute to boosting the immunity of your mental and spiritual landscapes. What should you expect from this webinar over the next 2 days? We have for you an array of discussions based on characters from literature who might, after all, be the best companions you're spending time with in these days of solitary withdrawals. Non-gregarious, non-social life is what we are all going through. And spending times with books and characters that form your heroes is a very good way to get through this crisis, we suggest. Hence, using the auspices of literary intellectuals, we bring you this lit treat. And believe me, you will go through a 7-course meal in this lit treat with us. Your appetizer has just come in the form of this introductory talk. Beginning with the genre of wisdom literature, we will take you through Shakespearean characters, aging ones showing mounting spirits. We will bring to you characters of Hardy and Hugo. We will also bring to you a spiritual cum scientific talk on finding inner resilience. You will also see what it is for a nation to be spiritual, to build up resilience. We will come back to our literary companions, Matthew Arnold and Iris Murdoch, to wind up our sessions. And the valedictory will be the dessert in your lit treat. So please stay tuned. Don't miss out any bit of this webinar, for at the end, be assured we are bringing this to you with great and pure love of our revered founder Chancellor, Bhagwan Sri Sathyasai Baba, and you will emerge mentally and spiritually stronger for the events of these times. Happy listening. Stay tuned, all of you. Thank you. It's now time to set stage for the first plenary session. The first plenary talk is by Sri K Chakravarthi, IAS retired, the Chancellor of Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning and Trustee Sri Sathyasai Central Trust. Sri Chakravarthi Garu has had a very interesting journey in his life. A spark of pure brilliance. At the age of 24, he completed his university education in economics and law and was inducted into the prestigious Indian Administrative Service, the IAS. During his tenure at the central and state governments, he has earned himself a reputation for competency and integrity. Although a native of Tamil Nadu, Mr. Chakravarthi opted to serve in the Andhra Pradesh cadre because the call of the Lord Venkateshwara of the Tirupati Hills was irresistible to him. Born and brought up in a Vaishnavite tradition, he found no place better than closest to Tirupati to offer his administrative services. But hidden behind this was another blessing in disguise. When he was appointed as the collector of Anantapur district, Puttaparthi, where the SSSIHL is headquartered, fell in his jurisdiction. On the insistence of his wife and a colleague, he finally visited Puttaparthi and had his audience, the first ever, with Bhagwan Sri Sathyasai Baba. And since then, life has not been the same for him. At the pinnacle of a thriving career, he shifted gears from IAS to SAI. He and his wife have been the residents of the ashram at Prashanti Nilayam since 1981. An avid reader, an engaging conversationalist, and an excellent speaker, Sri Chakravarthi is a pleasure to listen to at any time. And for today's talk, the first in this webinar, Sir has made a conscious choice to talk of the trials of Job and Satya Harishchandra to infuse in all of us listeners the spirit of resilience. Thus, the very first session begins with the genre of wisdom literature, the book of Ezekiel and the Markandeya Purana, about men who refused to curse God despite their troubles. Over to Sri Chakravarthi sir.
My prayerful salutations at the lotus feet of Bhagwan. I'm glad that the English department of Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning, Anantapur campus, has taken the initiative to organize a conference titled The Spirit of Life in Literature, Characters of Resilience. It is noteworthy that the conference is not restricted to English literature, but to literature as a whole. This wide scope enables me to speak for the next few minutes on the impactful story of Job from the Bible and of Harishchandra from Markandeya Purana. The book of Job is part of Hebraic literature. It grapples with a kind of deepest, in fact intractable problem of human life, namely the problem of evil, and more specifically, the problem of the suffering of the innocent. No conclusive answer is available, as you are left with awe at the mystery of God and His creation. We are left with accepting God's will without insisting on an answer to the question, why do the innocent suffer? We are driven to the conclusion that we should submit to the will and wisdom of God. In arriving at such a conclusion, we find that men such as Job face their suffering patiently and stoically. Job is known to the world as a man of righteousness and piety. He had been blessed with a large family and extensive property, both fixed assets such as land and movables as sheep, oxen, camels, etc. It is seen from the book of Job that the problem for Job appears when Satan expressed to God that Job's devotion to God is not unshakable and in fact rather superficial. If you are to be denied the riches which has been blessed with, so far, he may even turn against God. God, however, is convinced about Job's sincerity and steadfastness, that he allowed Satan to put Job to test in many ways, except being deprived of life. Satan's design starts with depriving Job of his material possessions and all his loved ones, which until then had conferred on Job his joy. It is to be noted at this point that steady deprivation of all possessions that invested Job's life with joy and peace till then did not leave Job with any sense of being forlorn, and in fact brought out his resilience in the face of odds, manifesting itself as a continued faith in and devotion to God. He expressed that his material and financial wealth was solely due to the benediction of God, and the same God has chosen to take them away from him. The continued faith of Job in God revealed his extraordinary resilience. The evil that Satan represents does not stop with deprivation of material riches of Job. He devises even more sinister deprivation, this time afflicting him with leprosy, a dreaded disease. It's a condition which the sufferer has without any hope of recovery. And as the disease progresses, makes a person an outcast without hope of recovery or of any human company. This denial and deprivation of all that constituted life of Job until then invites his friends to make observations about the beneficial impact of punishment and about the need to abide by God's dispensation. One of them remarks that no just man has ever perished altogether. Job's punishment is for his own good. We find at this point Job's reproach to God for behaving as persecutor and tormentor, and even goes to the extent of declaring that it is futile for man to be content with God for justice, and as such, he would like to have the peace of death. Job feels that his body and spirit have been broken by repeated attacks. We find at this stage the extraordinary resilience which Job displays when he claims that in spite of enormous suffering, his prayer to God has not lost its authentic quality. He is deeply aware that he cannot summon anyone except God himself to prove his innocence. Strange that he whom Job believes is the cause of his suffering has to vouchsafe for his sinless record. He finds his position extremely hopeless, as he cannot afford to question God and secure an answer. He is therefore driven to feel that he can find release only in death. Neither of his friends chastises Job from bringing charges against God and accuses Job of rebelliousness against God and advises that he should appeal to God for mercy, for God hears such prayers. We see that the views expressed by his friends were more in the nature of rebuke, and Job could not understand why his friends failed to see that it was God who brought about this extraordinary misfortune. He became so desperate that the only defense he can hope to have is to have his words spoken in the context of his total alienation from all his friends and relatives, and to have this inscribed on a rock, which are at least to stay as a permanent record of his words. There was a deep-seated feeling in him that eventually his innocence would be recognized by God and become his defender. This is where one can see the extraordinary resilience of Job. No doubt that Job had grievances and complaints against God. He retained his faith in God to the extent that he said that he would see God even if the nerves in his body were wrecked. There is no doubt Job made complaints about God for all the misfortunes that has come upon him. But he still had the conviction that the accusation of his friends would be set aside by the avenging sword of the divine justice. When Job is put through a series of misfortunes, and after his friends admonish him, we hear him in plaintive tones the following: "My soul is weary of life. I leave my complaints upon myself. I'll speak in the bitterness of my soul. I'll say unto God, do not condemn me." And a little later he says, "Is it good unto thee that thou shouldst oppress, that thou shouldst despise the work of thine hands, and shine upon the counsel of the wicked?" And still later he says, "Thou knowest that I am not wicked, and there is none that can deliver out of thine hand. Thine hands have made me and fashioned me together round about, yet thou dost destroy me." Later Job says, "Hast thou not poured me out as milk and curdled me like cheese? And then thou hast granted me life and favor, and thy visitations hath preserved my spirit." We find Job still later the following lines: "If I be wicked, woe unto me, and if I be righteous, yet will I not lift up my head. I am full of confusion. Therefore see thou mine affliction, for it increaseth. Thou huntest me as a fierce lion." And says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him, but I will maintain my own ways before him." And there are some more powerful lines. "My friends scorn me, but mine eyes poureth out tears unto you, God." Let's listen to more powerful lines. "He hath stripped me of my glory, and taken the crown from my head. He hath destroyed me on every side, and I am gone. He hath put my brethren far from me, and mine acquaintance are verily estranged from me. They that dwell in my house and my maids count me for a stranger. I'm an alien in their sight. And they whom I loved are turned against me. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God. Here do you find pathos and also stubbornness of faith, revealing an extraordinary resilience. Let me conclude with the adage, all is well that ends well. When the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind, knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Can thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given understanding to the heart? For Job, all his ordeal would seem worthwhile. After long chastisement, the Lord blessed in a manner that at the end, Job was more prosperous than at the beginning. In fact, God doubled his prosperity and he was left with plenty all round, in cattle, riches, children, and children's children. After all, resilience pays. It is not only in Hebraic literature that we find a great person like Job. We find a great one in the literature of Bharat too. That's the story of Satya Harishchandra, the king who, despite all the troubles to which he is put, stays true to his own righteous conduct. The story forms part of Markandeya Purana, and Harishchandra was a king who belonged to the illustrious Ikshvaku line. The king was asked by sage Vishwamitra to give him money to complete the yaga which had begun, and for which Vishwamitra asked for Harishchandra's kingdom, along with his chariots, elephants, horses, and his army, and all his possessions. Harishchandra said that he is placing everything at the sage's feet. There is even more which Vishwamitra sought by way of dakshina for the Rajasuya yaga. As Harishchandra had no money, he said he would give it in a month's time. And when he was not able to give it within the agreed time, he worked as a slave by selling himself, and still he was not able to find the money he agreed to give Vishwamitra. He then resorted to sell his wife and the son. He paid Vishwamitra the money he received as sale proceeds of the sale of his wife and son. Even then the amount was not sufficient that he owed to Vishwamitra. He then became a servant of an outcast, much against his own will. He, however, carried his duties diligently. As a person who was in charge of the crematorium, he found that his wife had brought their dead son. He then made a pyre and placed his son's body. He then went into deep meditation, thinking of Lord Krishna. As Harishchandra was in deep meditation, the lords, including Yama, presented themselves before him and told him that sage Vishwamitra enacted this whole drama to tell the world about Harishchandra's greatness. The chief of gods approached the pyre and then caused a rain of nectar on it. Harishchandra's son came out of pyre as if he woke up after a long sleep. The Lord of Death revealed that the outcast for whom he had been working was verily the Lord of Death himself. There is more evidence of Harishchandra's greatness just brought out when he refused to enter heaven unless his subjects were allowed to enter. The Devendra thereupon extended an invitation to all the subjects of Harishchandra to come to heaven. Markandeya Purana says that those who read the story of Harishchandra will themselves become ideal human beings. This story sets out the enormous strain that was put on Harishchandra and how through it all he steadfastly adhered to truth and right conduct. He revealed nobility through all the trials and difficulties. when he insisted on his subjects gaining entry into heaven along with him. Truly a story of enormous resilience. Thank you.
That was an eloquent talk on a widely and extravagantly praised text, the Book of Job. Lord Alfred Tennyson has called it the greatest poem of ancient and modern times. What is even more brilliant was that Sir brought together a book of the Hebraic literature with one of Eastern Oriental literature. The Book of Job with the story of Sathya from Markandeya Purana. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And as I sat listening to Sir's talk, what struck me were lines from Job, which says, "The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away." And in absolute faith, he says, "Shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil?" Our listeners are enthralled by your thoughts, and we have a couple of questions. From a lot of them, we will take a few of them for your indulgence, sir. In the first place, one of the listeners wishes to know, why have you specifically chosen Job and Satya Harishchandra for your talk?
Now, I originally thought of taking up the case of Benjamin Disraeli, a Prime Minister of England, who talked about getting on top of the greasy pole. I thought that's a very figurative expression that showed that the man couldn't have really come up to that height of being a Prime Minister unless he had really given or met with lots of problems, and unless he had showed resilience, he couldn't have really reached that height. And of course, the story of Abraham Lincoln is also a very inspiring one. And he lost a lot of elections, except the one which became a presidential election. And that really meant a change in the course of history. But then when I read this, the way in which you had given or put the title of the talk, you said the spirit, and then the bracket you had spiritual. Then I thought I may as well take advantage of that and go on to something beyond the secular literature. The two of the characters which immediately struck me as being characters which have really faced ordeals of a nature which I think in the normal course human beings don't meet. And one or the other misfortune they might have. A series of misfortunes cumulatively are not normally faced by human beings. But if there is historic, because if you look at Job, he is still treated as a historic character in Hebraic literature, not a mythical character. And if you can concede Ramayana as the Itihasa of India, and Harishchandra comes in that illustrious line of Ikshvakus, I thought it'd be good to pick up that character as a part of our Itihasa rather than in a very conventional sense of being a secular literature. That's why I chose these two characters.
That's absolutely convincing, sir. Thank you for drawing attention to the title, Spirit, expanding into spiritual of life. Your answer brought my focus back on that. Thank you for that. A second question that we can take talks about Would you treat these characters and their stories as mere stories, or legends, or mythology? What is your opinion on this?
When does history become legend and when does legend become mythology? It's very difficult to answer. Now, do we treat Rama or Ramayana itself as history or beyond that, legend? Or is it even gone beyond the stage and becomes mythology? For us, Rama is a character not bound by time, but essentially in time. He is not out of time. And the eternality of the message makes it all the time relevant. So I thought in similar way, Job's trials and tribulations are not defined by the historicity of time, but by the continuity of time. And therefore, he will remain relevant for all time to come. That's why I thought I'd possibly speak about him.
Fantastic. I think that's an altogether new perspective that you gave us about time and history. And in connection with this, maybe we can take this question because it's very topical and relevant, I think. How is this particular talk and the characters that you talked about relevant for modern man in these times of pandemic and panic?
I think humanity has faced worse crisis and come out of it. I mean, if you really look at it, could there have been a crisis greater than Mahabharata itself? And in those days, when so many people are reported to have been killed. So I think the historicity of time and the eternity of time, etc., are more in the nature of our considering them as bringing out lessons to us, which we can draw, out of which we can draw inspiration. You're not cowed down by the problems. At least you see a character who says that in spite of wilting under pressure, he still has the never say die spirit and come out of it and says, let me face. So I think the tomorrow can be better than today's, although the todays are worse than the yesterdays. So how do you fix yesterdays and todays and tomorrows? So concept of time, the relevance of what happened at a point of time, I mean, these are difficult to consider as distinct in time unless you really consider all of them as part of the flow of time. That's what I thought that these two characters bring out. It is defined by time. It is defined by possibly a certain happening at a point of time. That part of it is there. But they seem to be always relevant. There is some relevance about it because down the centuries, human nature has not changed. We may perhaps sometime become more than human beings and become, I mean, if you have something like a Superman of Sri Aurobindo. But otherwise, we will still continue to have the same problems of striving for perfection, but failing, but not giving up, and then once again picking it up. And through it all, there is a hope, and that hope is what characterizes humanity.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your valuable time and thoughts with all of us. There are many more questions. We will try and answer some of those questions on our email group. And before we set stage for the next talk, let us all take a virtual tour of the different campuses of Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning.
Established in the year 1968, the Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning is a unique institution with its focus primarily on imparting values-based integral education. This model institute aims to prepare graduates to be professionally competent, socially responsible, and spiritually aware. The journey began with an all-women campus at Anantapur. It has expanded substantially since then, and today it comprises 4 campuses situated in the states of Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka. The campus at Prashanthi Nilayam, like all the other campuses, believes in furthering the holistic development of its students. The institute takes pride in having high-tech research and instrumentation facility, the first of its kind to be set up in a rural setting that houses cutting-edge research that caters to the societal needs broadly in the areas of medical diagnostic applications and environmental remediation. With its state-of-art infrastructure, tech-enabled classrooms, a large central library, a 400-seater auditorium, multimedia learning center, and highly experienced and competent faculty to aid the learning of the young minds. The university has carved a name for itself in the country, not merely for the gamut of facilities they offer, but more so for offering each and every one of these academic amenities free of charge. Along with a rigorous academia, the institute also encourages active participation of students in various sports and athletic events. For only a strong body ensures a sharp mind. With an indoor stadium of international standards, every student feels allured to challenge himself, test his abilities, push his limits, and discover the champion within. The institute finds its roots in the philosophy of educare, realizing what is latent within. In keeping with this philosophy, the Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning provides diverse cultural platforms, be it in the little nothings of art, the creative charm of theatre and dramatics, the fascination of dance, eloquence of an elocution, the frantic answers of the general knowledge rapid fires, tantalizing themes of an orchestra. All these bring forth the latent talents and build self-confidence. The excellence in this domain does not come at the expense of the academic rigor. Both go hand in hand in a wonderful synergy. The year-long efforts culminate on the 11th of January with the grand display of the cultural and athletic presentations in the annual sports and cultural meet of Sri Sathyasai Educational Institutions. The day sees pure feelings of love translated into a pursuit of excellence in jaw-dropping stunts, electrifying performances, artistic presentations, gravity-defying feats, and an impressive display of teamwork and discipline by men and women alike. For a balanced personality, an agile mind must be coupled with a sensitive heart. And that's where the Sri Sathyasai Hostel for senior boys plays a crucial role in the grooming of every student's persona. Hostel is a home where each one learns to live for the other. In living together, eating together, serving together, and praying together. Values such as cooperation, empathy, understanding, and sacrifice gets imbibed into every student. In fact, the entire hostel functions as a self-sufficient unit, managed entirely by the students. Through the self-reliance departments such as the dispensary, the hostel maintenance, the dietary services for the sick, students understand the dignity and importance of labor and begin to see themselves as a part of the total fabric. But it does not end there. The institute bears in its name higher learning. The true higher learning happens in the devotional congregations at the Sai Kulwant Hall. Students are given wide exposure to the scholarly speakers of national and international repute, gatherings and conferences, celebrations of festivals of all religions, unifying people by transcending all geographic boundaries, find their confluence in the Sai Kulwant Hall. As a part of the curricula, the students participate in the summer course on Indian culture and spirituality, where learned scholars expound the glory of our motherland, helping students to stay rooted to our unique and vibrant culture of Sanatana Dharma. But this assimilation of values and higher learning isn't limited merely to the realm of head and heart. For every year, this love and learning is translated into direct action through a unique rural outreach initiative called the Gram Seva. Here, the students and the staff of the university voluntarily reach out to the surrounding villages in the spirit of service, bringing hope, ideas, and smiles to the people around. Such a robust educational system, providing integral education, was only possible because of the grand vision of our revered founder Chancellor, Bhagavan Sri Sathyasai Baba. At the time when education was being commercialized and the academic degrees were being bought and sold, in one of his discourses, he declared to the world, education is not a commodity, rather a necessity. I will establish an institution which would impart the secular education along with the goal of spiritual uplift, where the end of education is not mere accumulation of facts, rather transformation of an individual into an ideal citizen. It is under his persistent guidance and complete involvement these temples of learning continue to nurture and mold men and women of professional excellence and virtuous character.
It's now time to set the stage for Talk 2 that is coming very soon. Stay tuned. Listen to the next talk, which will be on Shakespearean characters.
After an invigorating inaugural session and plenary talk, it is now time for a literary discussion on Shakespearean characters. This session will be a brief talk by Dr. B Venkatramana. Dr. B Venkatramana is an assistant professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning at its Muddahalli campus. He has a brilliant career and enjoys literary and research experience. He has, to his credit, publishing a couple of research articles in national and international journals of good repute. He is also accommodated on the editorial board of some. His areas of specialization include new literature and literary criticism and theory. In this session, he will be talking to us on the topic Graying Characters of Mounting Spirit. He will base his talk on aging characters of Shakespeare, who exhibit immense grit and courage in the face of challenges. Over to Dr. Venkatramana.
Om Shri Sai Ram. Attributing everything to the will of the great taskmaster, Bhagavan Sri Sathyasai Baba, and invoking his blessings, I begin this talk, Graying Characters of Mounting Spirit in Shakespeare's Plays, for the webinar series on life, language and literature, brought to you by the Department of English Language and Literature, Sri Sathyasai Institute of Higher Learning. And this grey spirit, yearning and desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star, beyond the utmost bound of human thought, old age hath yet his honour and toil, death closes all, but something before the end, some work of noble note may yet be done. Made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find and not to yield. The above lines of Tennyson from his epic poem, Ulysses, strike the chord of harmony with Shakespeare's galaxy of aging stars that emerge at the crescendo of human experience, evolving in the soulful deliberations of the great bard of Avon. These men occupy the center stage of Shakespeare's plays and engage the heart's affections of the audience, evoking rousing reception for the poet and his works. They leave to the critics and readers layers of stratification, revealing the inexplicable web of God, the mystery of life. However, aging in Shakespeare is not chronological but psychological. Characters seem to age in relation to the logic of the dramatic action rather than the logical progression of the narrative. The oldest hath borne most. We are young, shall never see so much, nor live so long. Edgar predicts in King Lear, hence, aging is inevitable and indispensable for the flowering of human life. The quintessence of Shakespeare's great plays is wrapped in the images of these graying characters. Shakespeare wants us to pay attention not to the calendar but to the inner growth of his characters, like Hamlet. Hamlet seems much older than he did when the play began, not because he looks different, but because of the newfound maturity that allows him to look calmly on death. If it be now, it's not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. The talk centers around Shakespeare's aging stars like Lear in King Lear, Polonius, a political old man in Hamlet, Duke Senior, a wise old man and philosopher in As You Like It, Adam, an ideal and devoted old servant in the same play, Gonzalo, an old lord exuding a sweet reasonableness in The Tempest, King Henry IV and Richard II, men of special wisdom in the plays named after them. Lastly, Portia's dead father in The Merchant of Venice. King Lear is cosmos falling into chaos. So are Othello, Macbeth and Paradise Lost. But they do not match King Lear. King Lear is the unique eminence in the earth's literary art. Lear is so grand a literary character that he tends to defy direct description. Nearly everything worth saying about him needs to be balanced by an antithetical statement. King Lear, most comprehensive of dramas, shows us only one character so free, and he is anything but a great soul. Beyond the scale of everyone else in this drama, Lear is as much a fallen, mortal god as he is a king. Lear is loved as well as feared by everyone in the play, who is at all morally admirable. Cordelia, Kent, Gloucester, Edgar, Albany. Those who hate the king are monsters of the deep. Gonzalo, Regan, Cornwall. These days, paternal love and filial love are not exactly in critical fashion, and most younger Shakespeareans do not seem to love Lear, or Shakespeare for that matter. And yet it is difficult to find another Shakespearean protagonist as deeply loved by other figures in his or her place as Lear is loved by Kent, Cordelia, Gloucester, and the Fool, and by Edgar and Albany as well. Lear may seem as violent, irascible, and unpredictable as the biblical J-writer's Yahweh, on whom he is based, but clearly he has been a loving father to his people, unlike the original Yahweh. In spite of his despair and self-pity, Lear is revealed as a complex man, one whose punishment far exceeds his foolish errors, and thus Lear is deserving of the audience's sympathy. Eventually, Lear displays regret, remorse, empathy, and compassion for the poor, a population that Lear has not noticed before. Lear focuses on the parallels he sees to his own life, and so, in a real sense, his pity for the poor is also a reflection of the pity he feels for his own situation. Lear is the anointed king, God's representative, and thus he shares the responsibility for dispensing justice on earth. He recognizes that he bears responsibility for both his own problems and for those of others, who suffer equally. His understanding of his complexity in the events that followed is a major step in accepting responsibility and in acknowledging that he is not infallible. Because of his own suffering, Lear has also learned that even he is not above God's justice. King Lear is the play closest to the idea of anagnosis or recognition in Aristotle's Poetics. In other words, like other tragic protagonists, Lear hath ever but slenderly known himself. By an inevitable process, Lear moves past blindness and suffering to self-knowledge. According to the map he has in front of him, he will divide his kingdom into 3 parts in order to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we, unburdened, crawl toward death. Lear is preoccupied with his age, and he seems to acknowledge that he is no longer capable of ruling his kingdom. The image of crawling toward death is the first of many references, suggesting second childhood. The theme of infantilization becomes more obvious in his relations with Gonzalo and Regan, but it is especially pronounced in Lear's dealings with the Fool. Lear speaks of the division of the kingdom as an act of divestiture, both of rule, interest of territory, cares of state. At the end of the last scene of the play, it seems as if Kent, like Gloucester and Lear, will die. I have a journey, sir, shortly to go. My master calls me. I must not say no. The play ends with Edgar's couplets, separating the young from the old. The oldest hath borne most, we that are young shall never see so much, nor live so long. Edgar makes it seem as if the conflict between young and age is the tragic theme of the play. The oldest, like Lear and Gloucester, have borne most, meaning that they have suffered and experienced it the most. The young shall never be able to live life as fully as Lear and Gloucester or attain the tragic wisdom that comes through suffering. When Edgar says that the young will not live so long, he seems to imply not that they will not live so many years. Lear is fourscore and upward, but that they will not live such profound and meaningful lives. Thus, Edgar concludes with a plangent couplet that intimates a universal decline. It is as if the death of the father king god has removed the only figuration that participated neither in origin nor in end. Polonius. Shakespeare reveals an interest in developing characters of politic old men like Polonius in Hamlet, Nestor in Troilus and Cressida, and Menenius in Coriolanus. These characters are old men who have acquired wisdom from long experience. They are skillful rhetoricians and orators, yet they are also unscrupulous in their moral commitments. Shakespeare is fascinated by the type of the sensex from Roman comedy, which he develops in the many heavy fathers in his works. As represented in many theatrical productions, Polonius comes across as a foolish, talkative old man, yet he is also very important politically. He is the king's chief counselor, and it seems fairly obvious that he has helped Claudius to ascend the throne. He congratulates himself on his correct, but perhaps over-calculating shrewdness, characteristic of an old man when he is absolutely convinced of Hamlet's mad love of Ophelia. By heaven, it is as proper to our age to cast beyond ourselves in our opinions as it is common for the younger sort to lack discretion. He doesn't think too much of the reasoning powers of young people like his son and daughter. The next scene, he appears before the king and queen full of self-congratulation that he has found the cause of Hamlet's madness. He preens with self-importance and insists that the king should first admit the ambassadors from Norway, at which point, my news shall be the fruit to the great feast. Shakespeare goes to great pains to write a parodistic rhetorical oration for Polonius, like the parody of fancy rhetoric and diction spoken by Osric in Act 5, Scene 2. Polonius has studied his speech carefully to the point where it almost sounds memorized. It has a very formal introduction which doesn't get to the point for quite a few lines. It is quoted at length to give the reader some idea of its rhetorical expansiveness. My liege and madam, to expostulate what majesty should be, what duty is, why day is day, night night, and time is time, were nothing but to waste night, day and time. Therefore, since brevity is the soul of wit, and tediousness the limbs and outward flourishes, I will be brief. Your noble son is mad. Although the speech is comprised of inanities, it's a well-turned and sonorous rhetorical period of courtly diction. There is an immediate implicit criticism when the queen says, more matter with less art. But Polonius swears that he uses no art at all. Art, of course, is the art of rhetoric, as opposed to plain speaking. Once started, Polonius cannot be dissuaded from delivering his prepared oration. With extraordinary art, he swears that he uses no art at all. In other words, that he speaks directly and to the point. That he is mad, it's true, it's pity, and pity, it's true, a foolish figure. But farewell it, for I will use no art. The figure refers to the art of rhetoric discussed in many elaborate treatises of Shakespeare's time. In reading Hamlet's badly conceived love letter to Ophelia, Polonius shows himself to be something of a literary critic. He objects to Hamlet's salutation to the most beautified Ophelia. That's an ill phrase, a vile phrase. Beautified is a vile phrase, of course. Beautified suggests that Ophelia is not naturally beautiful but relies on cosmetics, the plastering art, like the Harold's cheek, in the king's confessional aside. In Act 1, Scene 3 of Hamlet, the character of Polonius prepares his son Laertes from travel abroad with a speech in which he directs the youth to commit a few precepts to memory. Among these precepts is the now familiar adage, neither a borrower nor a lender be, and the dictum, this above all to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day. Thou canst not be false to any man. The occasion of the speech has been established in advance, for in the previous scene, Polonius has told the king and queen that he has granted his son permission to extend his studies in France. This seems to be an eminently reasonable decision by a father concerned with his son's welfare, and the moralisms that comprise the speech in question sound good. Instead, the phrase, "to thine own self be true," remains in widespread circulation today, having resounded through the ages in such literary works as Henrik Ibsen's play Brand. Duke Senior. If old men often carry negative connotations in Shakespeare, a number of almost ideal wise old men speak to us out of their rich and varied experience. This is a traditional and biblical view of old men as sages and reverend counselors. These wise old men. He lives in pastoral exile in the forest of Arden as if he were still in the golden age. His philosophy seems to be expressed in the following statement. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which, like the thorn, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. He contrasts the tranquil sweetness of life in the forest with the painted pomp at the envious court. In the forest, Duke Senior and his co-mates and brothers in exile have escaped from the penalty of Adam, or original sin. They are like Polixenes and Leontis in the Winter's Tale, playing like twin lambs that did frisk in the sun, who knew not the doctrine of ill-doing, nor dreamed that any did. The life of Duke Senior and his co-mates has a sacramental quality. It finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Old Adam, the royal and generous servant of Orlando in the play, is more fully presented as another wise old man. He is, by his own admission, almost fourscore, a little younger than King Lear, and he is represented as an ideal type of the devoted servant. Orlando speaks an encomium for him. "O good old man, how well in thee appears the constant service of the antique world, when service sweet for duty, not for meed." Adam is not only old, but also old-fashioned. And he lauds the virtues of an older time. He freely offers Orlando 500 crowns, which represents the thrifty hire I saved under your father. He boasts of his virility. "Though I look old, yet I am strong and lusty." He attributes his heartiness to clean living. "For in my youth I never did apply hot and rebellious liquors in my blood, nor did with unabashful forehead woo the means of weakness and debility." He is an ideal type of the old man, whose age has not, like Macbeth's, fall into the sear, the yellow leaf. Old Adam's age is a lusty winter, frosty but kindly. Interestingly, Shakespeare is reputed to have played Old Adam. Gonzalo. Gonzalo in The Tempest is an old lord who exudes a sweet reasonableness. In the cast of characters, he is listed as an honest old counselor. We see him first during The Tempest, at the beginning of the play. Despite the storm, he manages to maintain his patience and good humor. At the very end of the scene, when the ship has split in half and everyone is drowning, he wittily remarks, "Now would I give 1,000 furlongs of sea for an acre of barren ground, long heath, brown furze, anything. The wills above be done, but I would fain die a dry death." He is a true believer in providence. In Prospero's long expository speech to Mirinda in the next scene, we again see Gonzalo in a positive and beneficial light. In the rotten carcass of a butt given to Prospero and his daughter in their exile from Milan, Gonzalo, out of his charity, provides them with good fresh water and rich garments, linens, stuffs, and necessaries. To advance Prospero's art or magic, Gonzalo, of his gentleness, supplies the magician with the necessary tools of his craft. Knowing I loved my books, he furnished me from mine own library with volumes that I prize above my dukedom. Prospero's brother Antonio, who has usurped his kingdom, and Sebastian, his co-conspirator and brother of the King of Naples, make fun of Gonzalo, whom they call Old Cook, and this ancient morsel, this Sir Prudence. By his own admission, he is an old man whose old bones ache, but his presentation of his ideal Commonwealth is full of imagination and exuberance. It owes an obvious debt to Montaigne, but it is also related to other contemporary utopias, being full of heterodox, anarchistic, and libertine ideas. In the Commonwealth, I would, by contraries, execute all things. For no kind of traffic would I admit no name of magistrate. Gonzalo says that letters or learning should not be known, and presumably that riches and poverty would then disappear. His most unusual stipulations is that there be no occupation, all men idle, all, and women too, but innocent and pure, no sovereignty. It is a truly and an idealistic socialist vision. All things in common nature should produce. In sum, I would, with such perfection, govern, sir, to excel the golden age. Gonzalo's ideal Commonwealth reproduces the golden age feeling of Duke Senior's pastoral kingdom in As You Like It. At the end of the play, all members of the shipwrecked wedding party are Prospero's prisoners, including, as Ariel reports, him that you termed, sir, the good Lord Gonzalo. His tears run down his beard like winter's drops. From eaves of reeds, Prospero expostulates to everyone in his charmed circle, but only Gonzalo is exempt from recrimination. Holy Gonzalo, honorable man, mine eyes, even sociable, to the show of thine, fall fellowly drops. Prospero is deeply moved and remembers Gonzalo's kindness to him. O good Gonzalo, my true preserver and a loyal sir, to him thou followest, I'll pay thy graces, whom both in word and deed. Presumably, Gonzalo accompanies Prospero back to Milan and resumes his high office in the state. Henry IV. Some characters in Shakespeare are not wise old men at the beginning of the play like Duke Senior, old Adam and Gonzalo, but are endowed with a special wisdom shortly before their deaths. In Henry IV, Henry is grievously sick in Act 4, Scene 4, and the next scene is his last. He is dead by Act 5. When his son, Harry, is invested as King Henry V, shortly before his death, Henry has an illuminating scene of reflection and quiet meditation. It begins with the king entering in his nightgown or dressing gown, followed by a long soliloquy. That is an apostrophe to sleep. As he explains to his son in a later scene, the king is suffering from a guilty conscience. God knows, my son, by what bypaths and indirect crooked ways I met this crown, and I myself know well how troublesome it sat upon my head. As a result, the king cannot sleep. O sleep, O gentle sleep, nature's soft nurse, how have I frightened thee, that thou no more wilt weigh my eyelids down and steep my sense in forgetfulness. Sleep comes to all sorts of persons, even in perilous situations like the ship boy upon the high and giddy mast, but not to the king. The conclusion is obvious. Then happy lo, lie down. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown. The king is in an unusually meditative mood, reflecting the fact that he is near the end of his life. He at first fences the body of his kingdom, how foul it is, what rank diseases grow, but then proceeds to a larger topic. O God, that one might read the book of fate and see the revolution of the times. His attempt to grasp the nature of history and his speculations are like Macbeth's insistent questions to the witches. Though the treasure of nature's Germans stumble altogether, even till destruction sickens, answer me to what I ask you. This speech also recalls Sir Lear caught in the storm and asking, all shaking thunder, to crack nature's molds, all Germans spill at once, that make ingrateful man. Germans are the seeds of all life. Thus, Henry is trying to establish some meaningful causation in the revolution of the times. But the role of chance is powerful. The king is filled with melancholy thoughts. How chances mocks and changes fill the cup of alteration with diverse liquors. Fortunately, one cannot predict the future, for if this were so, the happiest youth would shut the book and sit him down and die. Next, the king thinks of examples from his own reign, especially Northumberland. The man nearest my soul, who like a brother toiled in my affairs and laid his love and life under my foot. Yet Northumberland eventually proves a traitor as Richard II, the man whom Henry deposed and had murdered, remembers so unforgettably in prophetic terms. Northumberland, thou ladder by the which my cousin Bolingbroke ascends my throne. The king is trying to understand the revolution of the times that has brought him to the throne and now presages his imminent death. Warwick, an important counselor to the king, completes his thoughts, bringing his speculations to a philosophical conclusion. There is a history in all men's lives, figuring the nature of the times deceased, the which observed a man may prophesy, with a near aim of the main chance of things, as yet not come to life, who in their seeds and weak beginning lie intreasured. Such things become the thatch and brood of time. It is interesting that Warwick uses the seed image which continues the idea of Germans, and this provides an explanation for the revolution of the times. The hatch and brood of time contains within it the shape of things to come. So a philosophical man may prophesy the main chance of things as yet not come to life. In other words, there is a preordained order of events. Despite appearances, things do not happen by mere chance, as evidenced by the image of the ladder in Richard II's prophecy about Northumberland. Henry IV, now sick and near death, at least is reassured that what has happened during his reign are not mere random chance occurrences, but necessities. He is ready to meet them like necessities. Richard II undergoes a strong transformation during the course of the play of the same name, after he has been deposed by Bolingbroke, who becomes King Henry IV. Imprisoned and is about to be murdered, he becomes to a new philosophical awareness of his condition and the reality that surrounds him. While incarcerated in Pomfret Castle, he delivers a long meditative soliloquy. I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world, and for because the world is populous, and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it. Yet I will hammer it out. By examining his thoughts, Richard tries to emerge from his microcosm, or little world, and to understand his present situation, which will surely end in his imminent death. He sees himself somewhat historically as an actor playing many roles. Thus play I in one person many roles, and none contented. Sometimes am I a king, then treason make me wish myself a beggar, and so I am. The crushing penury persuades me I was better when a king. He is actually conscious of being nothing like his earlier mournful thoughts when he was deposed. I have no name, no title, nor that name was given me at the font, but it's usurped. He has become a mockery king of snow. In his prison cell, he is preoccupied with his present pitiful and pitiable status. But whatever I be, nor I, nor any man, but man is, with nothing shall be pleased, till he be eased with being nothing. He is preparing himself spiritually for death. In his soliloquy, Richard takes up images from the reality that surrounds him and analyzes them. He hears music that is out of tune and thinks immediately of the music of men's lives. In his own life, he had not an ear to hear my true time broke. I wasted time, and now doth time waste me. Richard next pursues images of time, specifically clock time. For now hath time made me his numbering clock. The sounds that tell the hour are clamorous groans which strike upon my heart, which is the bell. In his grieving, Richard has become philosophical. When a groom of his stable appears to comfort him, Richard moralizes on his horse, Barbary, now ridden by Bolingbroke. His dear horse has no sense of loyalty to his former master, but Richard checks himself. Forgiveness, horse, why do I rail on thee, since thou created to be awed by man, wasn't born to bear, I was not made a horse, and yet I bear a burden like an ass. Spurred, galled, and tried by jouncing Bolingbroke. At this late point in the play, when he is about to die, we sense that Richard has not only grown much older than he seemed earlier, but also much wiser. He is suddenly aware of his spiritual condition and he speaks philosophically like Hamlet in his soliloquies. Lastly, Portia's dead father. The wisdom of Portia's dead father in The Merchant of Venice, who has prescribed his daughter marry the suitor, who rightly chooses the casket containing her likeness. Portia is annoyed that she cannot choose a husband for herself. I may neither choose who I would nor refuse who I dislike. So is the will of a living daughter curbed by the will of a dead father. Nevertheless, she is determined to follow the dictates of her dead father. If I live to be as old as Sibylla, I will die as chaste as Diana, unless I be obtained by the manner of my father's will. The episode of the three caskets has a folkloric quality, suggesting that everything will work out well in the end. Nerissa, her waiting gentlewoman, is certain of the rightness of Portia's father's imposition. Portia believes that the lottery of my destiny bars me the right of voluntary choosing. There is something magical, of course, in the fact that no suitor has thus far chosen the right casket. The Prince of Morocco opts for the gold and the Prince of Aragon for the silver, leaving only one unselected casket. We therefore feel confident that Bassanio is certain to choose correctly. Nevertheless, the suspense is maintained even as Portia asserts the wisdom of her father's death. Wit or intellect reassure Bassanio. If you do love me, you will find me out. It is clear that Shakespeare uses familiar imagery to reflect the ravages of time, with time depicted with the traditional hourglass and scythe, a figure still encountered on New Year's cards. This imagery is almost obviously employed in the sonnets, but it runs throughout Shakespeare's works in his representation of mutability, a strongly biblical theme. White hair and wrinkles are part of the often repeated iconography of aging. The physical infirmities of old age are all laid out in conventional images, very similar to the representation of old age in the 21st century. Yet, there is an abiding sense that old age also brings with it a degree of wisdom gained through a long and serious confrontation with life experience. Shakespeare's galaxy of aging stars continue to move the audience with their mounting spirit. Now it's the time to take questions from the audience.
That was a scholarly analysis of Shakespearean characters. To think that what was written 5 centuries ago has relevance even today. Thank you, Dr. Venkatramana, for that brief but beneficial talk. We have here a few questions from the audience. One of the listeners has asked this question. What is the main theme or the main idea in Shakespeare's play King Lear?
I think that the main theme is betrayal. The play shows how people like Lear can put their trust in the wrong people. It then goes on to show what the impact of betrayal is on the person who has been betrayed.
Another question is, why is Polonius important?
Polonius is a proud and concerned father. In his first line, he tells us he hesitates to let his son Laertes go abroad and draws out his last meeting with Laertes because he is reluctant to see him go.
Wonderful, sir. Now let us take the third question. How are prose and poetry used in the play to indicate differences in social class?
Well, as in Henry IV, the noblemen and royalty almost always speak in poetry when they are alone. Falstaff, the country justices, and their friends speak in prose. The noblemen often, though not always, speak in prose when they are around Falstaff. After Hall becomes King Henry V, he no longer speaks in prose. This indicates a difference between high and low social classes, although it is one that can change depending on the context.
Very nice, sir. We have one last question. Why does Gonzalo present his idea of Commonwealth?
Prospero thinks of it as the place he is king and reigns over and has complete dominion over. Gonzalo thinks of it as a commonwealth where he crowns himself, kings also, but later he sums up the reasoning of a stateless state in the phrase, no sovereignty, which means no one will have dominion over anyone else.
Thank you very much. We'll meet again in our next session. Till then, Namaste, Sairam.
Sairam.